Courtney, can you share and give us a walkthrough on some of the projects that you worked on at Shopify and Microsoft?
Sure. I'll start off with my first one at Shopify.
You can share the onboarding project with us.
So just to talk a little bit about this project, Hatchful, the interface I was mainly working on was a mobile application. And it's a application where you would input what you want in terms of a logo, and then it would provide you with logo options, and then you can customize it and create it into something that truly matches your brand. So then you can get funneled into the Shopify platform where your logo would automatically be used in your Shopify store, and the branding colors are all implemented into your Shopify theme so that it makes it a very nice flow. The onboarding process is something I worked with my mentor on throughout my 4 months. And this was just redesigning how users think about logos and how they onboard through the process. What's really interesting is that, so this is the original screen. We had a few different categories at which people would input stuff that they input fields into the application. So one of them would be like brand values. Things that were really interesting about redesigning this is that it was a lot about the psychology of how people perceive a logo, less so about the actual interface and designing these small interactions.
Right.
So when you think about a logo, there's a lot of aspects at which you can think about it. You can think about it in terms of brand values, where it's like vintage, creative, modern, elegant. And these all make sense, right? Like you see a logo and you're like, oh yeah, that's 100% vintage.
Yeah.
But in terms of a technical aspect of how you would categorize logos and categorize these logos in the CMS system is a little bit different, because what I think is vintage may not be what someone else thinks is vintage. So it is quite arbitrary in how we have our opinions about certain logos. So it made it very difficult for the application to take in these user inputs and then show them something that's meaningful at the end of the process. So what we tried to do in the redesign is to sort of break down our logos so that it would have a more meaningful impact in terms of funneling and filtering out the different logos at the end. So let me just go to some of the data. So this is from Mixpanel, and this is where we would collect some of the data for how our logos and brand values and the inputs in the onboarding would actually impact the outcome. So as you can see, it's quite variable. We've realized that creative and innovative, these terms, even though it makes sense when you think of a logo, as a user who may not have any ideas what design has an impact on these words and how these words mean in design, makes it really difficult. So obviously everyone wants a creative logo. No one wants a boring logo. No one wants a logo that has been used by 100 different companies, right? So these were sort of issues that we're noticing, that people were choosing the exact same brand values and then getting the exact same outcomes and not being happy with them because that's not really what they perceive. So taking this data and sort of figuring out what we can learn from and how we can change it was a big part of this project. So here I just talk a little bit about the project constraints. So because how we are storing these logos in a content management system, we were tagging them with the necessary information so that we can show them at the end. This tagging system was a big influence in how we actually design them. So if we give them these brand values list, which we had, I think about 20 brand values, you're tagging a lot. You're putting, let's say this logo could fall into 8 categories, you're tagging 8 times. And then this is multiplied towards thousands of logos. So whoever is actually inputting it is going to have to do a lot of work. So we wanted to make sure that not only is this new redesign going to be beneficial for our end user, but also the people that are working internally. So this is the original step. We had your business, so you get to pick fashion, healthcare, home, different categories like that. Brand values, which was more about the aesthetics and the looks of the logo, and then your business name, logo usage, and then finally you get to go pick a template. So this is sort of like the breakthrough moment. We sort of got in front of a whiteboard and we were just discussing how can we actually break down these logos so that it makes sense for our users. They can understand it. They can really understand what kind of filters they're applying and how it'll impact. This is a big part in terms of decreasing that drop-off rate. So a lot of people will input their brand values and then be like, these logos that you're showing me make no sense. Like I put vintage, why are you showing me this modern one, right?
Yeah.
So they have this big disconnect from their the outcome versus like their inputs. So we really wanted to like decrease that. To do that, we really broke it down into the more technical aspects of each logo. So we looked at different things in terms of like time, abstractness, influenced by like environment, so stuff like that, until we came up with like 4 that we found were truly applicable to all types of logos, so that you can apply a binary one or the other for every single logo.
So at what point did you guys realize that you need to stop discovering more and more categories and instead narrow it down to the ones which are applicable to all?
Um, I think this happened a lot through the user research part. When we were talking to customers and we were talking to people who've worked with logos before, they gave really great feedback about how that list that we had was just so long.
Right.
You get to that page and you have to scroll 3 times on a mobile screen just to see all of them. And when you're trying to go through something really quick, you don't want to scroll and you don't want to have to think about it. Do I want a vintage one or a modern one, or do I want both? And then just like having all these options is really taxing.
Right.
And then additionally, when we did talk to our users, the imagery that we used with the brand values, so right here, they were quite confusing. They
Yeah.
thought that this, if I zoom in, this was the logo. They're like, oh, I'm a bit confused. I thought this was the logo I was getting, or this is the pattern I was getting. So things were this were coming up in our research that sort of sparked this idea of like, what if we just scrap it and let's start clean. Let's try to figure out a new way of approaching this problem.
Makes sense.
So taking into all this like from talking to our customers and talking to general people who work and design logos for a living, they helped us to sort of think in a new direction, which led to these 4. These 4 are our main categories that we can use to categorize things in the CMS. So it's very, when you look at a logo and you look at the mass amount of logos we have, you can see very clearly when something is simple or complex based on like the amount of like lines or styles or little components there are to each logo. You can say that, oh, this one is just very simple. It's like a circle. How simple can it get, right? So it's like very easy to make these differentiations. And then also by putting in the adequate imagery, like we have here showing the 2 versions, people can say, oh yes, like this complex one is something I want. Some people want a very minimal logo. Some people want something that's a little bit more intriguing, so that they can do these like different binary choices. And of course, we always give the option to just skip or to choose both, and you can be on your way and see all the options.
Right.
So of course, more whiteboarding. This was my first internship in design. So my mentor really helped me sort of really get into that design methodology where you're just whiteboarding, you're just discussing, you're talking about pain points and friction and all these little technical design things that you have to consider. So having this whiteboarding session actually is something I refer back to a lot, and just remember sitting in front of this whiteboard with my mentor and having him point out little things and just like discuss with me how to actually approach it and how to solve these problems. So we came to this as our final flow for like the logo screen. We wanted to keep it pretty quick. So I think anything above like 5 screens for onboarding gets very taxing. You don't know what step you're on and you just get very tired and you're like, how many inputs do I have to put? I just want to see my like final logo. So just keeping it as minimal as possible in terms of the number of clicks was something we tried to achieve. And then also, of course, trying to match these designs with our current, the rest of the application, and applying those components and applying those styles to this screen. And this is our final product. I think looking back though, there's definitely a lot more work that should be done here. There's a few interaction issues with like the pills at the bottom and just navigating between these screens. But for something that it was sort of my like first project, it's fun to just sort of look back and see like the steps we had to take just to get here.
Yeah.